had 5 days that we could work in, and day 1 is the hardest survival day, followed by day 2. If everything goes well, day 3, 4, 5, etc. are just settling in, creating more of a lifestyle. In our case, day 1 was 2/3 taken up with lightning storm. We do not venture out with lightning. I respect it too much. So we waited it out. Fire, cordage, traps, tools, shelters, containers. They get you from nothing to something. And generally, we can do that on day 1. There's no planning on a trip like this. You just do it. You know the skills, and you have the resources to do it, or you don't. If you don't have the resources, you can't make the skill happen. We have everything necessary to go from nothing through the survival stage into something in a pretty short period of time. As follows. When the weather finally cleared, we went out and we broke into 2 teams.
Group, huddle up! Well, Phil, Gary, go get clay maybe, huh? On. Break off whatever you can for dogwood shoots. We need a lot of them, and we may not have them where we're going. Yeah, Austin and I will find some flint. Get some legs cut. And then we'll link up before we head over.
Alright.
Alright? I'll hate it a lot.
No group hug.
No, we don't.
Bill and Jerry went off to gather some clay for pots, gathering whatever they found in between. Austin and I went another direction, and gathering again materials for baskets and hafting material and some cordage material. When we begin a trek like this, of course we are wearing clothes. We cannot utilize our clothing for anything except the shelter for our body. And containers would be necessary after a while when you start gathering stuff, because we're opportunistic. We came across some grapes and other edibles on the way, different rocks that work just right for making axes and knives, any nuts, anything we came across we'd have to transport, and our hands eventually start filling up. So cordage, a piece of string, comes in awful handy in binding stuff up, but after a certain point we still find ourselves loaded up. So even though we found and located several items on the first trek out, we may not have brought it all with us the first time, but we returned later with baskets and gathered.
Be strong enough to wrap around for a handle. Might get more fibers off of this. Yet, as pliable as it is, it'll make good hafting material for our axe. Or we can take this bundle, wrap it up good with our own bark. Clove hitch is a handy knot to know. Kind of holds itself, but, and that gives us a container.
Since Austin's primary job on the first day was to cut the grass for our roof of the shelter, I stopped and made several stone knives for him to do this. One of the reasons we can make such a fast transition from nothing to something, or from survival to living, is because we know where we are located, where the resources are. If we're dropped into a new area and we have no knowledge of it, we would have to spend a lot of our time searching out the resources. In this case, Jerry can walk right to the clay. I know which hillside to go to find the right rocks for making tools. And we know the likely spots where the proper weeds or trees are growing to give us fibers or material for making cord. far right side of the screen, where Austin is cutting the grass, we'll be dropping into the bottom, going out of sight on the left side of the screen. We chose for a campsite an area close to water, of which there is a spring. We can cool off in this hot summer by getting into the water. We do have a mosquito problem. Since we don't have a water container, camping near water is pretty much a necessity. If we have to walk a half mile to get to water, well, we're using the liquid up that we're drinking while we're there. So we elected to set our camp up back in a small little area that will be shaded. There's some good trees for shade there. And yet it's open enough where the air moves through there pretty good to hopefully help keep mosquitoes away from us. Once we chose our campsite, it really didn't take us too long to clean it out. We moved the obvious stuff first and cleaned it. Other things, as far as the weeds and the brush, got removed as we needed the space. Our initial gathering was a pretty good supply of dogwood shoots, which primarily were to be utilized for making baskets and also for hafting of an axe or two to get us started. A lot more of these shafts were necessary before we had 3 baskets and 3 axes finished. So Geri, of course, like a woman, caught sitting down. What she's doing is making flat cakes of our clay. Because as I mentioned, hauling the water is going to be a problem. And since we have no other convenient means right now for containers to carry water, we're hoping to get clay that she just dug made into pots and fire them in hopefully 3 days or so.
Well, I'm feeling to take any impurities out of your rocks, sticks, or anything that might interfere with the firing. We're going to hopefully make pots without temper that will survive the firing.
You did that in that outing 10 years ago,
yes.
Didn't you?
And it worked. If there's any rocks left in it, they will expand at a different rate than the clay, and it'll bust your pots.
I also chose decent shaped rocks at the right size and shape more easily lent themselves to making the tools that I needed. If you've got the right shape and size rock, the making of a flint axe is really pretty quick. You can utilize it as a hand axe, but by putting a handle on it, it makes it a much more efficient chopping tool, a whole lot easier on your body, and it cuts much better than what you could do by holding it in your hand. There certainly are hardier means of hafting axes, but I discovered years ago that in our situation where we're looking for a quick survival tool, something to go to work right now that beats chewing it with your teeth, that the wrapping of small diameter pliable twigs and then incorporating some cordage in with that makes a suitable hafting. I've made some of these quickies that have lasted me for years of pretty continuous chopping. One axe in particular I made like this, I know cut over 200 2 to 3 inch diameter trees. See, it's like flint knapping. What you're doing is you're finding that ridge When you start, you're starting on a round. So after a couple whacks, you get a flat spot. So it's harder, so you move off to the edge of that flat spot and you get a point. And it's easier to get a chop out of it. Most of the trees we ended up cutting out here were more dead than alive. A green tree or live tree cuts much easier than a dead one. But the smaller diameter ones we wanted for our shelter that grew amongst these larger trees, most of them had been choked out and didn't have much life left into them. So it made it harder on us and our axes both to get these chopped down.
Get that on film? Got it.
On just about every trip we make out, fire is our #1 priority. Being July in Kansas, fire really wasn't way up on our list. But we had a cool front, an unusual cool front, and it was wet, damp, and chilly. So we did kind of want a fire, not just for cooking, but for warming our bodies. Making fire in the rain is not really difficult. We've done it many times, but this one fought us. We just had wrong materials first time out, and we fought hard to get this fire. And dig deep to get all the gray matter you can. Ah! A little bit there. Can I put that right in there? And you want that notch to go in far enough so that that dust will readily roll into the... What surprised us all the most was the fact is that the cordage lasted as well and as long as it did. We'll have to start a new hole. Whenever I do a bow drill out primitively, I make 2 strings. One to start the hole and set up everything. Then I change to a fresh string for the actual fire making. We ended up attempting this fire 6 or 8 times before we finally got it. And the string held up throughout. Geri's primary task on the initial part of this outing was to gather the clay, to clean the clay, and to make most of the pots. Austin cut most of the grass that we utilized, but the most part we figured that was one of the harder things to do, cutting the grass and hauling it to camp. We put that onto Austin, who was young and sprightly, and us older folks, we hung around and pointed the finger and put it over here. And then we also built the frame, gathered the fibers, made the pots, and put it all together. Austin also found out that it was just about as efficient to pull the grass as it was to take the time to cut it, though his hands paid a little bit more of a price this way. In a similar manner as finding that cordage is as useful a container as a pot, fire is as useful a tool as a stone axe.
No, I'm not. I ain't gonna.
Do what?
I ain't gonna do it.
Fiber material is crucial in any primitive outing.
Yeah.
Axe number 2. We're really fortunate to have come across large patches of fibrous material, which we stripped down and brought to camp. And here Geri is separating the fibers from the stalk. Certain of the chores or the skills that are applied are done opportunistically as we need them. And earlier in the video you've seen where Bill had begun a basket, and if he had had a real need he would have gone further, sat down and finished it. I didn't even begin mine until we were sitting around camp with materials and I had a few free moments. A basket such as we illustrate making here is pretty simple to put together. Anytime primitively, blueprints aren't used in making a shelter. We looked at what materials we had on hand, the length of our posts, the amount of grass we had, the convenience of everything to our campsite, and we put it together. And then we said, okay, we'll make it this long, this wide, this shape, the roof this thick.
Really not that much.
Then we just went ahead and did it.
Well, you guys do this.
I've built thatch housing before, and I've built rectangular houses before, but I've never really put the two together in such a manner as I did here. Since we were simply using fiber straight from the plant as lashing, it was pretty simple to tie our house together, but in some instances we needed longer pieces of lashing, and tying them together gave us a piece of cordage 2 or 3 times the length of any one.
Hold this. Your chair coming apart.
When putting the grass on the roof, I put it so that the grass overlapped, so that we had 2 layers at a minimum covering the entire roof, and in many places 3. If we were going to make this shelter more long-lasting, if we intended to be here longer, I would have gone and made it 3 to 4 layers thick. Acts number 3.
By digging a hole at any point here, I can get a pool of water. But it will be less contaminated the closer I can get that to the source of where it's coming out of the ground. It bears also this is a good source of our clay, which we haven't tapped into. I don't need to make this hole very large for drinking. I'm making it larger so that once we have our ceramic pots, it'll be deep enough for us to fill the pots without disturbing the clay or the mud at the bottom. You can see here how the fresh water is seeping into the muddy. Eventually that hole is going to fill, the clay and mud will settle, and we'll have clear, clean drinking water. I want this smoothed down so we can insert a pot into here without disrupting it. Mud won't kill us, but I just want to drink clean, fresh spring water. And by creating a diversion channel from above it, I'll take away any water that may come in from the surface, thereby contaminating our fresh drinking supply. So what I've done here is I've created a reservoir below my main pool. Now what I want to do is divert the water through a channel Here, make this be my low point. So I will get clean water from pool number 1 to come into pool number 2. Now if I do this right, dig underneath here or take some means of diversion, like if I set this in there, what I do is I create a channel for water to flow in, and it will drip and fill the pot below it while I'm off doing something else. On faster running springs you don't have this problem. This is a really good example of what a slow seep or real slow running spring, how it can be developed to work for you. By sipping water from the surface, I'm assured of clean, pure water. Also, I'm not disrupting the walls of the bottom and creating more mud. I'm keeping my water clear. Good.
When we get a rain here in Kansas, we generally get some wind with it, and this was no exception. The storms that hung around for 4 out of these 5 days carried quite a bit of wind. We came up with the idea of movable sides to the shelter. There's a big difference between what a roof needs to do and what a side needs to do on a shelter. The side needs only stop the wind and temporarily stop the water, because once it stops its sideward motion, it's going to fall down. That's gravity. A roof needs to direct the water from its highest point down to the eaves, past the wall. So a roof needs to be thicker and more substantial than the wall does. By constructing the walls as we did, if the wind changed, we simply untied our temporary wall and moved it to another side. This not only kept the water out that was being blown in, it gave us more control of the fire, of which any shelter worth its salt will have a fire on the inside. And by blocking that wind, when I stepped around the corner from the outside to the inside, it felt like about a 15-degree difference in temperature. We were getting a little chilly in this rain, and it was nice to step inside. I wanted a decent bowstring so it would last for the duration of our trip anyhow. So I did cord up the fibers. The bow itself was simply a dead lower limb from a cedar tree. The arrow was a dead dogwood shaft. Then I heated over the fire and straightened it. I broke a notch into it sanded it on a piece of broken limestone, which acted as a sandstone. Reinforced the area below the notch by wrapping fibers. Took the thorns off of the locust tree, tied them in such a manner to the point that they were spread in order to use as a frog gig. Getting finished pots to dry sufficiently in a short enough period of time to be a benefit to us, it took some extra effort. When's the basket done? Well, when you run out of sticks or the ambition or the time, you finish it off.
Stuff already.
This particular basket that I made is suitable for carrying on my back, and it would carry a considerable amount of material.
There we go.
Yeah, we did.
The other two, made by Bill in Austin, could be carried in your hand conveniently, or a piece of cordage could be made to hang it from your shoulder. For firing pottery, everything has to be right. If the wind comes up wrong, it can ruin it. If it begins to rain, it can ruin it. Our clay here is really sensitive when it comes to firing. Over the years, we've developed a method that works extremely well. We run 90 to 100% success ratio on our firings. We have to preheat these slowly, and just as importantly, they need to cool off slowly and gradually. Any interruption to this process results in cracks in our pots.
Sounds wonderful.
5 out of 6 ain't perfect, but it ain't bad.
Now we can bring the water to us. Geri and I have been on several primitive outings over the years, and one thing we always stress is to allow the traps to work for us instead of hunting. Even frog hunting is going to take a certain amount of time. Anytime you hunt, you're taking time from when you could be doing other things. The trap will work for you while you're doing other things. It takes very little effort to harvest crawdads. Frogs, there's plenty of frogs. Locusts. Bird nests, 4 fledglings in it, in 1 egg. We brought down 2 chicken eggs from home, thinking that would supply approximately the nutrients that we would have gotten.
It looks pretty good to me.
In great abundance, and a real favorite of any of our students, especially the kids, is roasted grasshoppers. Just make a switch about 3 foot long, and you'll have a handful before you know it. A real boon to any primitive camp would be a deer. Geri always commented that if you got a deer, you got Kmart. Just got a little of everything. You've got hide for clothing, you've got bones, you got heart sacks and bladders for containers, you've got an abundance of meat, you have sinew, you have teeth. You've got Kmart, you've got everything. 2 easy ways to harvest deer that I'm going to show you here are both illegal. We do not use them, we have not used them, and we will not use them unless I was in a plane that went down and was starving to death. It is against the law. But primitives did use it, and we use it as a game. What we do is we build a snare heavy enough to hold a deer. Then we built a lighter snare, about twice as strong as a kite string maybe. That snare we set in a trail. Then we clean the trail out looking for footprints. And if the snare is gone, whereby something has gone through it and caught it and broke the snare and walked away, we can tell by the footprints what it was. Now, targeting a deer, when a deer would walk through this snare, it wouldn't have shoulders like Austin has. So it wouldn't have shoulders to catch. What it would do, it would have a long neck. If its head was held at the right height and it walked through, and the noose needs to be a loose running noose, would close down on its neck. As it tightened, in real life, the animal would struggle. The noose that I've developed and put on this snare would tighten down. But as the animal choked down and relaxed, if there developed slack in the rope, the snare would not slide back on itself. It would lock in position. It would keep the flow of blood to his brain from continuing, and he would simply go to sleep. Another deer harvesting game I play is with a crossbow trap. I take the real time to build the bow, build the string, and build a real flint-tipped arrowhead, or even bone if I had it on hand. But I arm it with a blunt point. And if I find the trap set off, and the arrow is lying on the near side of the trap towards the bow, it will tell me it bounced off of something, and I can tell by the tracks in the trail what animal that was. If there's deer tracks in the trail and the arrow is lying between it and the bow, I'll say I've got a deer. If there's deer tracks in the trail and the arrow is on the other side of the trail, I missed, the deer won. If we do catch a deer, then we'll feel like we can go to the house and gather deer hide, some bones, internal organs, or even an entire roadkill. I'm not really big into edible plants. You can know all there is to know about plants and starve to death in a wilderness situation. You can learn a trap in 15 minutes and spend just minutes building and setting it, and that animal will feed you and give you the nutrients that that plant will not. This time of year, here in Kansas, there's all kinds of plant life available, and you don't have to be a plant person to identify many of them. The rose hip off the wild rose provides plenty of vitamin C. Wild plums are just coming on. The prickly pear cactus. The rosettes of thistles provide an edible root.
Yeah, be a hungry rat, but I guess.
Shown here we have the root of the burdock and the root of the thistle and the leaf of the thistle. A good supply of blackberries and a pretty good portion of grapes. Not too long after we fire and start bringing in some food, you think of a means of cooking it.
Get some of this into there, huh? Oop, I'll break it up.
We generally find the right rocks and build a little oven in which we can bake stuff. And the rock that forms the top of this oven makes a griddle. One of the eggs that we brought from home in lieu of eating birds, we poked a hole in and then just stuck in the coals, which gave us a hard-boiled egg. The pack rat we threw on the grill.
Not because the rock wasn't hot.
Along with a mess of crawdads and grasshoppers. Now, one pot can take a little bit of food and make it go a long ways. Here we illustrate by taking a second egg in lieu of birds, threw that into boiling water. Then we shredded the meat of the crawdads and added it. Took part of the meat from the pack rat, tore it up, throw it in, and pound the bones. Don't just throw them out, but pound the bones up to get the nutrition from the marrow and add that to the stew. Then we took some of the various roots that we had, cut those up in pieces and threw those in. Your body is looking for energy. So by taking the various foodstuffs we have, throwing it in one pot, made it easier and more efficient to divide the nutrition that we had gathered in 4 pieces.
Does it taste smoky? It tastes eggy.
It's pretty good.
Probably pretty hot.
That is pretty good.
Just has its own flavor, though.
Most people do and never have problems.
I hate to say it, it tastes like chicken.
The main comment that Austin had about the food that we fed him was the fact that it was bland. There was no real flavoring to it. So there you have it. 5 days we've gone way beyond the survival. 2-inch rainstorm proved that our shelter was waterproof. Fire was made, pots were made, food was gathered. We begin living. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, HPS. No study of primitive wilderness skills is complete without the introduction to and learning of traps, killing, and handling of dead animals. The disease, HPS, is an oftentimes fatal disease proven to be transmitted by small rodents. Small rodents especially are the bread and butter of trapping in conjunction with primitive living and survival. You will see in this video that there are several field or deer mice being caught and eaten. This tape was shot prior to our being made aware of this danger. This didn't make the national news until 1993. As reported by the Centers for Disease Control, HPS is primarily contacted by the breathing of the dust of dried urine and the droppings of these animals. Contact with the body fluids of these animals is also reason for concern. Any contact with the feces, urine, saliva, and/or other body fluids is to be avoided. Suspect all rodents. HPS is a fragile virus. Exposure to high enough heat, thorough cooking, will kill it. Don't handle rodents with your bare hands. You, the observer and student, are responsible to learn what information is available on this subject.
Why even bother cooking it?
How is that stuff, Billy?
Good.
Just walk in front of that camera, you damn fool. When we left on this trip, our campsite that we had chosen was probably less than half of a mile as the crow flies from our home, but then we wouldn't be on a trip if we only went a half a mile. So we need to test our containers, our travois, our baskets. So by going approximately 2 miles through the pasture, over ledges, down through the timber, that tested our gear as much as anything. Fire and shelter both were pretty much priorities for us. Even though the weather might range in the 70s or 80s, it could also freeze at night. We had prepared fire sets with us, so it wasn't anything more difficult than taking a pack of matches to build the first fire. You'll note later we built several fires throughout because many times the fire would not last overnight. Grass is one of the best materials for waterproofing a shelter, and the nearest grass is anyhow a quarter of a mile away, and so we had to haul that in. You'll see a lot of overviews of our campsite to show not just the fact that we have primitive goods, but time in relation to our campsite, the projects we might be working on at the moment. You'll see just about everything we took out with us being used.
That'll swell up.
It'll swell a lot. That'll swell a lot. Really?
Geri made 2 bottle-shaped dogwood baskets, and she coated one of them only on the outside with pine pitch, and the other she coated inside and outside both, and these made really good water containers. There was some upkeep with them. If the pitch is prepared or heated wrong, it becomes brittle and is breakable, and created some leaks. Both of these containers have hung in our house, and over months and years the pine has settled and it's kind of just melted down the basket, which in itself helps to seal it. We use these for many years. They're really effective as water containers. A lot of our time was spent around the fire. Most of these people were students who had never cooked, some over an open fire before. None of them, I don't believe, had ever cooked in ceramic pots. So this was new for them. basically replicating an Aboriginal lifestyle, we brought a large chunk of meat with us. I don't recall on this trip whether that's beef or it was just a large hunk of venison. We simply hung it from a tree limb and sliced off steaks for 5 days, and it was just as good the last day as it was the first. We attempted some fishing. We didn't really put our hearts into it, and the fish knew it, and they didn't cooperate.
I just don't understand. I haven't been able to find any mice all week long.
You're just not looking in the right places, Billy.
That must be. Just one of the things could be feelings right on top of your head, but you never know the
You just don't know it, do you?
No.
The clay that Jerry and John are working with here, they had dug here on Monday morning. Jerry took special care on seeing that they dried really slow so there was no cracking. And Wednesday morning we fired them. This to me is a primitive pot. It was prepared completely under field conditions, including the fire being started initially from a hand drill. Note here that John seems to be having trouble making a bowl. John had just recently learned how to make primitive pots.
Maybe you should just make a plate.
Well, because as I'm turning it, I cup my hand around it.
Oh, like that?
And I don't think he was really happy here when he had to start over. He did end up making a couple of really fine pots.
Just keep cupping that top, and then just... And you,
Here, Mark took it on himself to build a fence enclosing one side of our compound to block the wind. And he had no background or instruction. He just went ahead and did it, and he made one fine windbreak, which helped prevent our fire from getting away from us. Our water source was about a quarter of a mile from camp. We didn't develop a spring at the campsite itself. There was a really good one about a quarter mile away. We had the containers, so we made daily trips out to bring water back. The importance, again, of containers.
back.
There are several ways you can test one's experience in the wilderness primitively, and one is to boil water. Think about it a minute if you don't have pots and pans. Here Jerry has dug a hole in the ground and staked out and held out with rocks a deer skin and filled it with water. Took hot rocks from a fire, put them in there and boiled this water. So we have now fresh meat from the hide, plus whatever vegetables that she had on hand to throw into it. A pot, a means of boiling, can make a little bit of the food go a long ways.
Good. Good.
As mentioned in the introduction, at the beginning of this piece, beware of hantavirus. It's a real deadly disease. It's out there. It's real. And I can't caution you enough about careful handling of these animals.
Voila.
On this trip, we caught several mice, and I believe a couple of pack rats. So we had a lot of meat on this trip. We didn't need to bring meat with us.
Breakfast, Bill?
Breakfast.
Supposed to keep well down so they don't get
Mighty Mouse.
Here become weeping willow.
They went for the meat. Do you bite first if it wasn't cleaned out? The head?
Middle bite.
I'd take the middle.
Middle,
I'd
right.
want the middle.
Yeah, okay. If you were passing it around.
Take one down, pass it.
Need more garlic.
Help me! Help me!
Are you?
Wait,
Is that on yet? Is that on? Oh shit!
Get it over with. It tastes pretty good.
Yeah, they really do.
Yeah, it's not bad.
Even on a trip with taking nothing, after the second day or so, it gets kind of boring. So you need a project. You need something to occupy yourself. Here, Mark and Scott elected to chop down a tree and make a pair of boats, one for each of them. After checking out this roadkill, or lightning kill likely, the boys decided to let the traps work for them. The biggest difference in camp life from using steel tools and stone tools is time. You've got to slow yourself down. We live in a fast-paced world, and we expect things to be done in a hurry. And when you work with stone, you just have to realize things don't come quite as fast. Making a good, workable, primitive bow is not any big secret. If you're familiar with working with stone tools, and you're familiar with making bows, you just put the two together and you end up with a good bow. John and Bill elected to go ahead and string up and tan a large buckskin we had brought along. That didn't get finished during this week. The buckskin was extremely heavy, and it didn't dry out quick enough for us to get the hair off. The hearth was a center, it was a gathering spot. It was right in front of the house. We were building there. All our activities took place right around the hearth. And though we ate basically 3 meals a day, you'd find us nibbling all the time. Everyone had their individual pot, and we had prepared dried goods that we brought with us, and we always had something cooking.
What is it? Tatonka.
You don't believe it. You don't believe it.
No.
What is Tatonka?
Getting got 3 points that way out.
Now don't go leaping over and break them.
There you go. Yeah.
The clay we have to work with here in Kansas is really fussy. You have to be very careful about the firing of it. We were fortunate we had a still morning. We had plenty of dead wood laying around. We got up at daybreak, built the fire, and the firing went off without a hitch. And we had 100% success in the firing.
Only show I gotta make sure I hit every weekend now.
That's good.
So, piece of bread here on the stick.
He's in.
Why even bother cooking it?
The viewer's going to think we spend an awful lot of time eating. Well, we did. Life in the wild is pretty easy going once you get established, and it doesn't take much to get established. And while you're out there, you're burning a lot of calories, so it's kind of fun to put them back in.
Billy did a mouse this morning. And share some of it. Just walk in front of that camera, you damn fool.
I didn't think it was armed. How come he gets to do that? None of us do, huh? We've been here longer than him. You know, I'm tired of it.
Ha! There! Ah! Yeah, it is. Let's just see how damn deep it is.
I think the biggest thing that made this week the most successful of any that we've taken out was the attitude of the people. There was just always something going on. Every once in a while someone laid down and just catch a few rays, but there was no boredom. Everyone was busy. They found something to do. They burned the bulls. Everyone was just always busy.
These pots were made Monday afternoon. I let them sit in the shade upside down for a few hours after supper. Then I kind of put them about 3 feet away from the fire and kept turning them. And I did get them moved in about 2 feet from the fire that night. The next day, around noon, I put them by the fire again and just kept moving them, turning them, and putting them closer. And until they felt really dry. Then we covered them good so they didn't get dampness from the dew overnight. We got up early this morning and the wind wasn't blowing, so we fired them. Now this one, I see tiny cracks on the outside, nothing inside. That's a good ring. This one looks good throughout. That really dings good. Let's put water in them and see what happens.
Day 5 was the final day. We knew we went out. That was the time limit we had. And we, of course, started by pulling our fish line and picking up loose ends. Note, the pot being cooked in here is one Jerry was making earlier in the video.
Oh, Trapper Bill!
Yeah, it's coming.
5 mice out of 4 traps in 3 days. Doing pretty good. Getting tired of eating them?
Yeah,
Right.
ready for some real hamburger.
Well,
What do you mean? Other
pounding
people?
it
What are
with
you
a
talking
rock
Get shit from
will
other people.
crush
I don't
the
Yeah.
small bones in
about?
it,
They're not eating shit.
make it less
no, but they're eating
Rabbits
this-
eat shit.
they're
Cows
eating
that
stuff
it's a
that other
mouse.
people
Your
don't.
horses eat shit.
and
Your
Yes,
horses
they
eat
do.
more edible in my opinion.
What are you chewing on?
This is sage, and this will also be used to cook with the mouse to make it more Epicurean.
Here Jerry's cutting off steaks from the last of the meat. This lasted well, hanging out here since Sunday. One of the days got close to 90.
Night.
What's the fat for, Bill?
Mosquitoes usually do it. I
Well,
had a mosquito bite. It was like this.
John got kind of irritated yesterday when Scott and I and Mark ate all the mouse, so we're making this one especially for him. And the fat will lay on top of the sage and on top of the mouse.
Well,
Make it real juicy.
you're a culinary artist.
Yes.
Very modest, too.
Thank you.
Bill's barbecue.
Please. Is it bones and all, Bill?
Yeah.
True artiste.
What that for Scott? And the old
No, that's just-
smasheroo.
It's like a waffle iron.
What do we got?
Oh, we should have mouse cooked in sage and beef fat here. Little booger, isn't he?
Kind of flat. What kind of rock did you get him with?
Big rock. Wanted to make sure he didn't know what hit him. I don't think he did. Not much thicker now than he was before. A little hot, but really pretty good. Like to try some?
I sure would, thank you. And the question we're posing out right now is, what did you gain out of the last 4 or 5 days?
We're getting quite an insight on what it really takes to not only get out and not survive, because we've done well, but what it takes to get out and do it in Stone Age technology. What it really takes to get out and do it. What it feels like to accomplish something. This is my first pot that really worked. I've got another one over there. We made baskets. It's just it's a great feeling.
Mark?
I think what I learned the most is there's a certain, seems to be a certain economy of scale in this type of situation. Just going out and doing this by yourself would be really difficult, but I guess what I learned most is that to a certain extent the more people you have, the more there is to go around for everybody, because everybody's pitching in, and somebody's helping build a shelter over there, somebody else is going gathering food over here. So to a certain extent, more is better up to a point.
Scotty?
It's given me a different view of things.
You got tears in your eye.
Primitive technology for a while. It breaks my heart to be here. Been into primitive technology and survival for a while, and I always took a knife with me, and this opens up new doors, new paths to follow. I'll know what to work on when I do flint knapping and stuff like that. So it's given me a greater insight to things.
Willie?
I've learned how to cook bread now.
Cook good mice.
I've only been in this for about a year. I've thought about it a lot, and this has been the actual application of things that I've read about, so that's what's been interesting. You can actually, instead of reading a book and dreaming about it, you're living the dream. And our shoulder chair is just kind of like anything you'd see in a museum, so you can say that you has been said around here several times that you're living in the museum instead of walking past it, so it's been fun.
And some of them aren't too bright, but
Teamwork's good.
no, everybody worked together, and it was just, we grew into a family and made it all possible. There was just no friction or anything. Everybody worked hard, and it was great.
home was kind of sad in its way. Everyone here really enjoyed themselves. We really grew together into a family unit. And though we were really enjoying ourselves, we were running out of things to do. These guys had the real world waiting for them and had to get back to whatever life they came from. Whenever we head to the wilderness, fire is our number one priority. The day we went out was actually sunny, but you see from the video that water is standing and fog was setting in the low spots. It was wet, terribly wet. I took charge of the group that built the house. Anthony, he wanted the challenge of going out and making the fire from nothing, because of the fact that both of us were so busy with what we were doing. This wasn't videotaped. In 1993, you see us going out, and all of a sudden you see us putting the finishing touches on the house with an established fire. I replicated approximately what Anthony went through to build his fire. My replication was much simpler because it was dry. I went out. It took me 2 hours from start to finish to gather the materials and build the fire. I believe Anthony did it in maybe 3 hours. It was much harder for him. Everything was saturated. He had to get to the inside of the wood where it was dry. With stone tools, it's not nearly as easy as if you had a metal chopper of some sort. It can be difficult to get on the inside of a piece of wood. Here I attempt to show you approximation of what he went through.
Oops.
Never built the same house twice. There's no blueprints in building a shelter under primitive conditions. You use what you have available. This is one of the finest that we've built on a primitive outing. I suppose it was 8-9 foot tall, about 14, 15 foot long, and 8 foot wide. It was a large, roomy shelter. It was a real home. And like any shelter we built on these trips, it's waterproof, and we have a fire on the inside.
Some things that primitive man was working on and discovered, and one of them was if it's very cold at night you sprout feathers, and that's how they stayed warm.
In this method of the hand drill, it's called floating. And that's where your hands stay in one spot on the drill. Only at the very end does Anthony bring his hands down to create the extra push he needs to get that coal.
Probably got black teeth.
Don't want to eat the skin. That's all you have to do to remove it. Now, I don't like to eat the intestines, but I eat the rest of the internal organs. And just rip it open. Pull out anything I don't really want to eat. And keep the heart, lungs, liver. The head's got brains in it. Like a little fucking nose. And that's that.
So there you got it for this trip, folks. I'm sure you've noticed a big difference of going out with all of your tools and equipment and going without. The going without is survival. The going with is just a different type of camping trip.